Welcome back to another episode of The Power of Your Story, a space for people to share their story, learn from their story, and ultimately empower others through that story. Before we get into today's episode and today's guest and the background that she has in regard to this topic of finding one's strengths and identifying them, I wanted to just make a few quick announcements. And the first one being, and you'll be able to see this at the bottom, one sec. You'll be able to see this at the bottom, and that is if you've enjoyed any of the previous episodes, or if this is your first time tuning in, please consider supporting our show by either leaving us a review on Facebook, LinkedIn, or any other platforms that you're able to find us on, or sharing this episode with people in your network. The theme and the topic that I wanted to explore with Kathleen McMorrow today, who was introduced to me through another mutual connection of ours and a guest on this particular podcast, his name is Scott Mason, revolves around this concept of identifying and finding one's strengths and different ways to do that through our own personal perspectives and lived experience. And so I wanted to have her on this show for that particular reason, to create this space for all of us to be able to better understand our strengths, the moments that led to that particular understanding, and everything along the way that contributes to that. So with that said, let's please welcome Kathleen McMorrow to the show. All right, there she is. Clearly, you can tell my dog was trying to join in, as part of
that.
Part of the conversation. He was definitely exercising his own strengths and abilities. So I find it interesting that we're connecting for the second or third time in this, and we're having this conversation about special talents and gifts and strengths that we've had in our lives. And I figure that the best way that maybe we can even start this conversation at hand in regard to these two topics is by exploring our own personal journeys of how we've discovered those things in order to create a space for other people to be able to relate. I know for me, one of the things that has worked tremendously, or at least I think that was the thing, when the reality of the matter is I don't truly know. I think there's hundreds of events that led to that one particular moment, right? So it's harder to identify what was the origin of me finding my strengths. But I know for me, one of the techniques that worked tremendously is being able to sit down and have an honest look at my life and break it down into three different areas that I wanted to at the time, which were strengths, weaknesses, and areas that I wanted to explore and learn more about. And I know it was in looking at my life through that lens and being able to identify, well, what are the areas that I'm not so great at? Or what are the areas that I feel I'm good at right now? And then what are the areas that I wanted to learn in? That was the catalyst to, I think, bringing me here, to being able to create this space and facilitate the conversations. But I know that not everyone is in the same exact boat. People have their own journeys to finding it. When you think about your own talents and your own gifts, can you recall certain moments within your life that led you to this particular point?
Well, first of all, thank you, Oleg, for having me here today to talk about storytelling in general.
Mm-hmm.
My passion in my career is telling the stories of others. And here today, you're asking me to share some of my own story that led me on the path that I am to have this great passion for storytelling. And I think a lot of it starts with my mother. My mother had an incredible wit, an ability to bring a room together. She was a fantastic storyteller herself. And I had a very reserved, quiet father who really enjoyed the fact that she had this capability to bring everybody a large room together. And, my mom was a homemaker. She was also a woman who battled a very severe crippling disease. And that's a very different experience when you grow up as a small child with that versus the mom who's can be super physically active. I didn't have that, but my mom was extraordinary in not focusing on things she couldn't do, but what she could do. And people always marveled at the fact that she was this funny, entertaining, vibrant person. But I think it came down to the fact that my mother was very fulfilled in her life despite the obstacles. And I think, the choice for happiness and looking at what you have versus what you don't have and wanting to share what you do have with others is the passion that she had. And I think she imparted that to me and to my sisters in a very beautiful way that made us very good communicators, that made us very honest and authentic in our communication. And I think it launched us on a path that made us successful students. Not that we don't all have our quiet moments, but that kept us from being shrinking violets and kept us from being wallflowers, but instead that whatever we wanted to share, that we were sharing it from a place of heart and a place of service and wanting to help others. So, along the way, I learned a lot about communication simply through and storytelling through going to school and, being able to be a good student and having your essay read before the class and what the rewards were. And it always came down to authentically sharing. When, the best essay, no matter what it was about, when it came from a place of authenticity versus I have to write this and get this done and over with.
Yeah.
So,
Been there and done that.
Sure, we all have on a deadline. But you know what? I noticed that teachers have said over the years to not just myself, but to many students, I really like that you put yourself into this. And that's what helps people connect so beautifully. And that's why I chose public relations as a career. And, the art of storytelling is all about authenticity. And when you share your story in a way that others can see themselves in you, or they can empathize or sympathize with your experiences, that's when you're getting to that heart-centered communication. It's not about the brain, it's about the heart. How do we all connect from a place of heart? And I think when you can unite people and move them with wit and caring and generosity and authenticity, that's when you have a great story.
Did you ever find it challenging to be authentic?
I think I found it challenging to share sometimes, right? We all need a safe place to share. So sometimes I moved a bit as a kid. So when you're the new kid on the block, you're holding back a bit. And I think there were times I felt more myself at home. And what I thought was very sad is that many of my friends, and we're talking about when you're 10, 11 years old, said they were more themselves at school than at home. I'm really glad I was in a family where I could be completely myself and loved for myself and respected for who I was at my core and didn't have to put on a show of any kind. But a lot of kids I knew around me said they couldn't really be themselves at home because of whatever the dynamic was at home, whether it wasn't very nurturing, or it simply was a situation where there were a lot of expectations put on themselves and there wasn't a lot of room for the levity that should come with childhood. I had all that. I was very fortunate, along with some very serious responsibilities. There was a big balance. A lot of me was a little adult because I was in a certain situation with a mom who had some physical limitations, and I felt a lot of responsibility around that. But that served me well. It made me a very independent person. But at the same time, I very much had a very nice childhood, and my parents made sure of that.
That's awesome. I can relate to much of what you said. I think one of the first things that came to my mind when I was thinking about my own childhood and how that contributes to one of the strengths, and that's to be able to maintain that level of authenticity. I think the challenge that I personally experienced when I was younger is sometimes not being able to, and I don't think it was a lack of trust. I think it was because there was such an age gap between myself and my parents, not being able to freely share some of the things that were happening, let's say at school or
Mhm.
some of the friendships that did or didn't work out, or times I would get in trouble, whether it was, I don't know, running in the hallway or whatever it was. And so I think age certainly played a pretty big factor in it. I know that this talk about a story, the story that I was creating in my head was, would they be able to understand because they're so far removed from an experience that I'm currently going through.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the things that I personally found it challenging to maintain that level of authenticity throughout that time, because I didn't fully understand whether or not those people would be able to relate, or if that's a very distant memory of theirs that they may or may not be able to recall. But I will say that it was in probably the last years of middle school, maybe leading into high school. That's where I started to open up even more and more to my parents and have that dialogue with them. Now, in regard to the parents, and I'm curious to hear what kind of experience that you've had, as well as anyone else that's tuning in right now. I think there is still that parent role. I think it carries for quite some time. And I'm only noticing now that I think that parent role is transitioning to more of a human role,
Mhm.
having that human to human connection,
Mhm.
versus before for many years it was, okay, these are people I view as my mom and my dad. And so I'm probably not going to share certain things with them because of the role that they had.
Mhm.
Did you have a similar experience?
Well, I was really always very close with my parents, and because, I grew up with my mom in a certain circumstance that I related
Hmm.
to before, and then my father got ill when I was in high school, we became extraordinarily close friends as well. So that boundary, even though I was also came along late in my parents' marriage, my dad was well past 40 when I was born. My mom was almost 40, and I
Hmm.
had two much older sisters. So I do think that certainly as times change, things were a little bit different. And, but I also found my parents remarkably adaptable despite this fact that they were, more than a generation removed from my experience.
Yeah.
And I think that but certain experiences just make you stronger friends, and age kind of falls away. But I mean, I think they saw certain things happening with my older sisters, and I observed things from the experiences my sisters had, and I just kind of knew what would be the best things to share and the best things to keep to myself. And it was really more about protecting them. If I was hurt or hurting, I didn't always want them to know that in any way.
Hmm.
Because
How did you determine that? Not to interrupt you, but how did you
sure.
determine that, as far as what you share and what you don't choose to share? Because I know this is a big question that I wrestle with, and that's, what is that fine line between being quote unquote fully authentic and then holding certain elements of yourself back?
Well, authenticity doesn't have to mean a violation of privacy, right? So we
Hmm.
have to understand authenticity doesn't mean spilling everything out there. We can all maintain a certain level of privacy. And we also know that in various relationships, certain people might be in certain situations overprotective of us. And why get them upset? Why
Hmm.
get them worried or concerned when it may be something I just need a little more time to handle on my own? And
Hmm.
so I didn't bring them into things that I thought I could work out on my own, whether I was having, a conflict with a boyfriend, or I was involved in, some situation where I felt I wasn't being treated as fairly as I should be. I would often learn to manage that on my own because I didn't want them to be upset. They had enough to deal with. And so I think when you sort of are very gentle with people because they have enough to deal with and you don't want to add to that, that's kind of where you make that judgment call.
Do you think you started to understand much of that during your childhood, or in the later years, that everyone is fighting about, or everyone may be fighting about battle that you don't
Mhm.
necessarily know anything about?
I think when you hear what your parents went through as children
Mhm.
and you come into your own adulthood, you didn't maybe understand everything as a teenager. Like, oh, they just grew up such a long time ago. It's all different for us. But, once I got into my 20s, and particularly my later 20s, where I really felt like, okay, I'm an adult now, right? You get near 30. Yeah, you're definitely an adult. I began to think about my father's situation of being from a large Irish family and losing his own father at age 5. And my aunt had told me a very sad story about him when I was about 18. When my grandfather passed away suddenly at that very young age, my father, the Irish would have a wake in the house. So my grandfather was laid out. My dad was 5 years old. My father was the second to last of his family. So he had like 11 brothers and sisters, big, big family. Mm-hmm. And my father didn't understand that my grandfather was gone because he saw him there, and he was pushing on his dad saying, "Wake up, Papa. Everybody's here to see you." I mean, that took the life out of me when I heard that. And she said, she was an older teen, and she said, he just didn't get it. He just couldn't believe his father was gone. And, he had started walking around wearing my grandfather's fedora and his overcoat and carrying his briefcase around the house. So when my dad's dad would come home, my 5-year-old dad would take the role of him and couldn't wait to put on his coat and his top hat and carry the briefcase around. And he loved to imitate his father as a little boy. And I started to understand that my grandmother never remarried. She really had it tough. She missed her husband terribly and raised all these kids on her own and worked really hard, and they all turned out just fine. But I see that my father, he respected his mom's work ethic to keep everybody together, to keep everything going. But her heart was broken, and he was keenly aware of that as a small child, and his heart was broken too. So he also didn't have a father to show him how to be a father. And so there were sometimes areas of disconnect. And I look back at what an extraordinary dad I had because he overcame extraordinary circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it fascinating to be able to look back at one's journey and identify how it is that we looked at our parents and the things that they, whether it's spokenly or unspokenly, passed on to us, which later on could have either turned into strengths or areas to improve upon, or just different elements like that. Like I always look back, not always, but in the recent years, I started to look back at the impact my parents have had on me. And there's so many things that they have done where it was kind of one of those unspoken actions. I don't know if they intended. For example, one of the things that I acknowledge about my dad is his ability to always remind me about the importance of emptying the dishwasher. When I was younger, I just didn't get it. I would finish the breakfast and I would stack the dishes in the sink.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, at some point throughout the day, I would come back and put it away. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved out on my own and I started to live kind of on my own terms, I started to notice that problems could appear from that. All of these insects, ants, roaches, all this other stuff that comes from having dirty dishes in the sink.
Yeah.
And so it's just fascinating how certain actions, at least for me, that my parents were doing on a daily basis that I didn't fully understand the impact back then, that now I view as almost like core strengths or hidden talents, all due to the fact that they chose to follow a specific method every single day. Even on the days when I didn't listen to them, didn't put it in the dishwasher, they still continued to repeat it the following day and the following week and the following year.
Isn't it amazing the power of those little lessons?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a kid, you're like, oh, yeah, right, because the world's going to fall down. If I don't empty the dishwasher, yeah, this matters. But it's all those little details, and it's all that preparedness. It's just like, so when I went away to college, I had so many friends around me. They were just stumped by the washer and dryer down the hall to do their clothes. They were like, what do I do? They were calling their parents. They were freaking out. They're like, okay, I put the money in, but where does the detergent go? What do I put? Do I put the fabric softener in at the same time? And I'd been doing laundry since I was like 9 years old. Like I just knew how to do stuff in the house. So it was very interesting seeing that not everybody grew up that same way. Yet, some of my friends who were in that position, they all maintained lovely homes today. They learned it when they needed to.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also fascinating as it relates to this topic and maybe many other topics, such as adulthood being one of them, is that at least for me, I haven't been able to articulate a true beginning to any of those journeys. I think the same thing applies to strengths. I think, if anything, what I've started to understand, and I know you've shared this with us prior to us going live, and that's really in identifying the strengths, it's been hundreds and hundreds of events that
Yeah.
led to a particular moment. And then after a while, for me, I started to better understand the meaning of those events. I think that's what ended up happening. But it's just interesting to look at that and also understand that, at least this is my perspective of it, that there truly is no true beginning. If anything, it's just something that I've been doing thousands and thousands of times. And then after a while, I started to see the true meaning behind what are my strengths and what are my quote unquote weaknesses or areas that I need to improve or want to improve in. Have you had a similar experience in being able to
Well,
understand what your strengths were?
my thought process is there are no ordinary days. Things that we
Yeah.
looked upon as just another day, all those thousands of days that go by as the years fly by, there's a lesson in every one of them. There's
Hmm.
something small you pick up along the way that has magnitude 10, 20, 30 years later,
Hmm.
that some random day in, April of 1994, I must have learned something. And so you really begin to have color around your experiences in that regard, that you look at as you age more cumulatively. What goes into a day for the people around you, for the people who most influenced you, from your family to your teachers, to your bosses, to your mentors, to everybody in your life?
Hmm.
How do they create their day? Because we're all seeking to create meaning in each of our days.
Hmm.
I believe that anyway. I think most people get up and they want the best out of every day and they want to give their best. And we all know we're all challenged. We don't all have a great day every day, and we're all not our best selves every day because we're human. But if we can help each other make that humanity a little less challenging, then I think we're doing something special with every day. So all the little things and the things that are so easy to take for granted that our families and our friends just innately and naturally do for us add up to showing us a mirror to our own strengths and to our own weaknesses. But it's good to know your weaknesses too, because I
Hmm.
think we've all had situations where we've had a considered weakness, but it really wasn't that, because we later developed a facility for that particular talent, whatever it may be. When you work towards something with diligence and you set a goal, everything you need is innately within you. And sometimes it just takes the good people around you to help bring it out. And I think that's what I learned the most, is that over all those seemingly insignificant little days were really where the most important lessons often were.
Yeah. Do you look for lessons in your day to day now?
I do. All the time. Like, how can I learn from a challenging experience, whether it's a big challenge or it's a small challenge? I think by examining the day, I am able to plan better for when the next time a similar challenge comes along,
Hmm.
or get myself into some degree of grace over something that normally would have deeply upset me. Instead, learning to let go so I can be my best self versus a hurt self, an aggravated self, a cranky self, whatever that self might be that I don't like living with. And so I do look for the lessons in the day, and I look for the opportunities in the day, and whether it's just to make somebody else's day better, or to do something for yourself. Sometimes we're not taking care of ourselves well enough, and we need
Yes.
to work on how can I be better to me? Because it's not someone else's responsibility to be good to me. It's my
Mm.
responsibility to be good to me.
Do you reflect upon the day and the lessons learned at the end of it, or do you try and do it in the moment? Like, what does the process look like for you?
So It's a combination of both, right? If I find myself getting very stressed by a situation, I'll try to cool myself down. I'll try not to get ahead of the negative thoughts and send
Mhm.
myself into a place that isn't very good. That's going to ruin, hours when maybe I need to contain it in minutes. And then the other part is that if it was a bigger event, I'll probably take a few days sorting it out or get some distance from it, especially in the busyness of the weekday. Maybe on the weekend, I can really think through, all right, how did certain situations pan out this week? And what can I do to make sure that those situations are healthier going forward, whatever that might be, both for myself and whoever else might be affected by the situation. So I try to find space and make space for that reflection naturally,
Mhm.
just so I can feel like I'm better prepared for every challenge that comes along.
That's awesome. I do a similar thing. I think for me, one of the things that I started to learn, not relatively early, but within the last 2 to 3 years, is being able to ask myself that question of what am I here to learn,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to challenging situations, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think every situation has a lesson behind it. No matter how small, no matter how big that thing might be, I think if anything, what I've learned is that it's all a matter of perspective. And the perspective that I have walking away from any situation is probably going to be the perspective that I act upon and actually turn into a habit or whatever it is. The other thing that I find fascinating that you pointed out, and I'm curious to hear how you personally do this, but taking care of yourself. Do you, when you wake up, what's the first thing that goes to your mind? Do you set an intention? And here's a thing that I'll at least share a disclaimer about my own self. As intentional as I am in going through a morning routine, there are still days when I wake up and check the phone or check the
Yeah.
computer, check the email. I think it's just a natural part of being a human. And but what I have realized as part of that journey is that setting an intention for me almost like created a space where I don't know what the future encounters are going to be like, but somehow they've all been interconnected.
Mhm.
Somehow the conversation at 11 o'clock and the conversation at 3 o'clock happen to have a common thread, even though it's two people who are completely different, living on literally
Mhm.
polar opposite sides of the world. But that's where I begin to believe that this concept of intention, which I think is a strength or is a skill to be able to set it for the day, does play a role. It does have an
Mhm.
impact in the course of the activities for that day.
So a lot of my intention for the next day starts from the night before. It
Mm.
starts with the to-do list. It starts with figuring out when I am going to make time to take a walk, make time to appreciate the birds in the forest behind my house, and try to make sure that I have that going. But because I'll be honest with you, I run a public relations firm that's growing. I wake up every day feeling 3 hours behind, and I, honest to God, and it's sort of like, so I'm going to be, authentic and raw here.
Yeah.
I wake up and yeah, I sleep with the phone. I'm like, all right, what's an email? What happened? Okay. And, but it's all right. I think it's a byproduct of being in the profession that I've chosen.
Mhm.
And you have to make sure nothing crazy happened overnight for your clients. That's number one, because, your day isn't about you, it's about your clients. And so in my business in particular, very much so. And then it's a little like, okay, let's go, God. Help me make this be a good day. Give me the strength for anything that's coming, to make sure that I'm taking care of those I'm responsible to take care of. And then I call out cat cereal because it's time to give Audrey Hepburn her morning cereal. And that's a really important part because that gives me some peace. It's spending a few minutes with our pets in the morning, a couple of minutes in grace with God, at least, and then, getting ready to roll, pull myself together, getting to the desk, thinking about how I'm going to make a difference with the business that I own.
Why do you do it the night before? What do you think that creates when you sleep?
Um, I hope it gives me a sense of peace. And I think that I've had that. I don't like to go to bed jumbled or just falling into bed with no vision for how my next day is going to be. So I do tend to put some planning into my day, even though I might wake up and see that first email message, which is something unexpected, and I got to shuffle the day. At least I really focus on what my priorities will be. And I often see that there is no room for me to be a priority. And that's something I'm working on very, very hard. And it takes work. It takes planning. It takes intention. And I am falling short on that. And I'm being very authentic there. It's really hard to grow an emerging business when you're concerned about the bottom line. You're concerned about, bringing on team members and being responsible for their well-being and their success. And so these are things that I could use a little more zen with. I was doing some meditation. I should get back into doing it, but 20 minutes in the morning and night, that's 40 minutes. That seems like an enormous luxury to me, but it really isn't. And I have to be very clear on that. So I'm working on getting back into meditation because the cumulative benefits of meditation are extraordinary. And I do work with some authors in the spiritual space, and just amazing spiritual transformations can come from meditation. And you can be in prayer through meditation, or you can keep your prayer life separate from your meditation life, or whatever you might wish to do. But the evidence is overwhelming of the benefits of taking time to meditate in the morning, in the evening, and sometimes just have that moment of peace in the middle of a stressful day. And I've done that. So that much I am proud of, I have to say, because I never used to do that. And it often let things I should have let go sooner be things I held on for too many hours and days.
I'm the same exact way. I think for me, when I started to recognize the power of being able to just sit there, I will say that for the longest time, I didn't actually understand meditation, if I'm being completely honest with it. I thought that it was one of the more boring tasks that I was certainly a part of. And the other thing that I struggled with, just the whole concept of sitting down and not doing anything. I'm the type of individual who loves to create, and this was something that is complete opposite. Being able to sit down and just observe thoughts and not necessarily have to feel like I have to act upon those thoughts, were two very different journeys that I had to learn that I chose to learn within my own journey. The other thing that I think you pointed out, which is fascinating to me, is this whole concept of being able to take a step back in order to let go of the things that really may not need to be held for that long. Pets have played a tremendous role in my life for that.
Yeah.
Even just being able to sit down and watch my dog eat his breakfast or dinner or drink water, there's something about that. Like, there's something soothing about that experience where it just completely takes my attention and focus away from what I think is the quote unquote problem or the area that I need to improve to something that's completely different. So
there is nothing more soothing to me than the sound of a cat crunching and enjoying her food. It's an absolute joy to take care of a pet. And, my pet was a rescue. She came from a shelter, and she had a hard life before this, and she has a life of extreme luxury now. And it is my honor and duty to give it to her every day. So it makes me very happy. And, listen, the benefits of owning a pet are manifold in terms of health. I mean, lowered blood pressure, overall happier sense of contentment. It's remarkable. They give to us far more than we can ever give to them.
That's probably very true. I didn't think about it that way. You spoke a little bit about working with authors and speakers. Can you tell us a little bit more about how people can connect with you? And do you have anything that's coming up as part of your work that people can be a part of?
Well, there's, if you're looking for a PR firm that does things a little bit differently, one of the things that we try to do, in addition to working with various for-profit enterprises, is that we have a give back called the Compassion Optic, which we are working on formalizing, but it enables our team members to go out into the community and volunteer on company time for causes that they wish to pursue and be rewarded for that. And it's because I don't believe in a culture where I dictate what our charities are, what I do, because I know everybody has particular passions and I want us to be able to fulfill them. And, our entire platform for our clients is comprehensive servicing across all channels for communication. So if your website needs fine tuning before you're ready for a big publicity program, we can do that. We'll align all the messaging. We can create all your social media platforms. We'll drive your content. We'll book your speaking engagements, etc. So our website is the Communications Optic. That's tco-pr.com. And you can reach me as K McMorrow at tco-pr.com. And you can call me at 973-665-8167. And I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to chat a little bit about the PR and integrated marketing communications business, because it's all about the power of authentic storytelling.
I like how you mentioned the whole concept of giving people a choice and the freedom to choose whatever it is that they want to support, because that's been a topic, once again, probably a topic for another conversation, but the question of how do you support others in their own success or in their own dreams? Because the reality of the matter, and this is something that I've learned this a couple times and still continue to learn it over and over again. It's that not everyone wants what you want.
Right.
And not everyone has the same dream. So just because you might have a particular passion about building your own business and the end goal that you have for it, it doesn't mean that every single person that's a part of it has the same thing. So it's fascinating how people are able to adapt and do that. And I guess a parting question for you before we conclude here, how do you personally support other people's dreams, especially those that work with you? Like, how do you create that space where they can work towards the vision that you're putting forward, but at the same time supporting the visions that they have for themselves?
So a lot of times it's about aligning our clients with the right team members and having people do work they really care about and are particularly passionate about. I mean, I always enjoyed the public relations field, but sometimes I got siloed into particular areas simply because I was assigned to certain practice areas in a large PR firm, or I had a number of accounts that had a lot of synergy, but I would ask to do other things. It's like, well, you have so many other clients and we want to make sure when other additional clients in that area come in, you're such an expert. And that wasn't really helping me grow the way I envisioned for my own career in a very diverse agency. I hope to have a diverse career, but that's not exactly how it went. So I'm creating that space here where we're extremely diversified in terms of the types of clients we serve, and so that there's really something for everybody to ignite his or her passions around, because people care deeply about health and medical. Other people might care about fitness. Other people care about promoting spiritual authors. Other people have passions about law firms, and there's quite a bit to go around. That's the beauty of being a truly diversified agency. And at the same time, I think when you mentor people and grow your team members, you have to provide immediate feedback. Don't leave people hanging 5 days when they've submitted something to you. They're trying to move forward and learn and grow in that moment. So I try to provide very fast feedback, give direction, be really supportive of people who are going the extra mile. And the feedback I've received as a leader is that they appreciate that someone really, they work for someone who has their back, and that's really nice to hear. So I enjoy mentoring, and I look at the things I didn't necessarily get coming into my business that I would have wanted as a young person in my business who needed some mentoring and would have appreciated it. Sometimes a lot of people my age in this profession would say they had a mentor themselves. And I want to make sure that I'm providing those growing experiences to anybody associated with my company, and also to young people interested in a career in public relations and marketing communications, because it's absolutely fascinating and rewarding work. But it's hard work, and it takes a lot of hours, which is why I also want to give people a chance on company time to do a give back that's much more satisfying than writing a check to a charity, but truly participating in the mission of a charity. And making sure that they can leave, an assignment and someone else will fulfill it the rest of the day, because they're committed to the literacy project at the local library that day for 2 or 3 hours. We can cover 2 or 3 hours to let somebody volunteer.
Hmm. What is an area as a leader right now that you would like to improve in?
I think feeling like I don't have to drive my own self so hard, but
Hmm.
being kinder to myself, having trust in the processes that I have put in place, that success is cumulative, but it's not necessarily linear. I've had to
Hmm.
learn that lesson, right? Because there's ups and downs when you're a
Many
business
times.
owner. And so not feeling like you're failing, especially coming out of this pandemic, even though we pivoted and we did well and we actually continued to grow, and we were a very young firm when the pandemic started. So that was not you would think awesome timing for starting a business, but turned out okay. But now there's also been some areas that have slowed down in response to the pandemic, because even long-term clients are rethinking what they're going to be doing as a
Mhm.
strategy going forward. Everyone was affected in some way. And even though I'd say many of our clients, we help them pivot and do very well, they're really thinking about resources and how to handle resources. And so there are peaks and valleys in business, but a lot of them say once the fall comes, they're going to be all in again, and we're really excited to be right there with them when that happens.
Wow. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing the space with me. And thank you to Scott Mason for introducing the two of us. He's quite the connector and
Yes.
quite the
And
person to know. So I just appreciate this time
thank
and
you.
everything that we've been able to share and add value to ourselves as well as anyone that's listening. So I appreciate you as a person, and I appreciate you as someone who's been a part of both of these shows in the recent days.
Likewise, Oleg, it's been just a beautiful opportunity to be able to work with you like this, and for us to connect and build upon our relationship, which started one
Mhm.
Saturday
Yeah.
a year ago at one of your fabulous seminars. And boy, did we have some amazing breakout rooms and insights. It was so beautiful the way a whole bunch of strangers connected so beautifully, because it came from everybody authentically sharing their story.
Hmm. No, I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank